All right, so I'm going to confess, I started trying to write this lecture, and I sat down and I was writing away, and all of a sudden I started to envision Steve Jobs, and then I was like walking back and forth in my clicker, introducing, the new MacBook Pro. So, scrapped that. I started writing again, and then for some reason I started writing Down H. Oaks, and I was like, why am I writing Down H. Oaks? So I scrapped that, and decided that I was going to take that as a cue to not write a formal lecture, but to maybe just talk about my process as an artist, and share stories from that, and maybe that will matter more than a really well-constructed lecture. So it may be a little all over the place, but hopefully something that I say will matter or impact you or help you in some sort of way. This is a tape from a band called Minor Threat. And the reason why it's important is because I've had this for over 20 years. And when I started to make films, it sat right underneath my monitor while I started making films. And the reason why it was important to me is because the gospel's always been the foundation, right? The rock to stand upon. But I thought it was really important for me anyways to also find something that could be the backbone for me. And punk rock, and especially hardcore music, played a pretty prominent role in that. Minor Threat in particular played a significant role because what I began to be interested in when I was younger, not realizing, this is now looking back, right? Not like I was 15, I'm like, oh yeah, right? Was that Ian MacKaye started the straight edge movement, which is about not drinking, about not doing drugs, and not about having promiscuous sex. So in reality, it's the word of wisdom, right? And so what I began to find as a young kid was places where the gospel existed that weren't necessarily like gospel or Mormon kind of things culturally, but where truth existed and gospel principles existed. So this became really important to me because it didn't matter where I struggled with my testimony. What I found is that listening and being a part of the hardcore community allowed me to still be balanced, because sometimes I feel like people I meet when they struggle in the church, what they do is they pile lots of things on top of themselves to make themselves feel like they can never go back to church and never be active again, or that they're so far gone that there's no way coming back. And I think those, for me, the questioning and the wondering and defining who I was really important, but I knew I needed it to be in a safe place as well. For me, that's what kind of punk rock did to me, or did for me. The other thing, so this was, I named it Screaming at a Wall, and these are the lyrics from the song. And the other thing that the punk rock culture taught me was to fight. So being LDS or growing up LDS, you learn to strive for perfection. That's important. Being a part of the straight edge and hardcore community taught me how to fight for it with everything that I have. And that really, those two kind of things allowed me to fight and struggle to have a career in the arts. So I served a mission in Nebraska, and I served in Glenwood, Iowa, and I would ride my bike to this town called Tabor. And one day on our preparation day, I was riding my bike, and lightning and thunder struck at the same time. And the truck driving by me was looking at me like that, and of course Susie with me. So now I get electrocuted all the time. So that's going to be a part of this lecture. All right, so I started school late. I came home, got married, and I thought I was just I worked for a dry ice company, kind of off and on. I really liked it because I would just be in a car for 14 hours, and I lifted 14,000 pounds a day, and I got really strong, and that was really exciting. And I didn't talk to people, and that was really exciting too. So I thought I was going to do that forever. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to. And so I worked for him for a little while, then quit, and then I worked for him a little while, and then I quit and went back to school. And then I got to a point where I met with a professor who was like, you can't just keep taking one class. You'll graduate like in 15 years. You need to like take it serious. And so I was like, okay. So I was trying to figure out how I could go back to school full time. And then Airgas contacted me and they needed me to do some seasonal driving. So I was like, yeah, sure. And then as it got closer to the semester, one of the drivers got in trouble and they asked me if I'd come on full time. And I said yes. Even though praying about it, I knew that I wasn't supposed to. I was like, you need to go back to school. You've already received that answer, go back to school. And I was like, yeah, but this job will, I already had 2 kids at the time. I was like, this job will feed my kids. And I kind of used some of these like, I need to be self-reliant. I need to be a provider as ways to like counteract the actual answer to my prayer. And so I told him I would take the job. And I was working at a coffee shop at the same time really late at night. And then I would wake up, we started about 4 in the morning and I'd drive for them. So it was probably a day to 3 days after I told him I would take the job. And I was driving, delivering to a medical facility that was like 6 stories high. And these trucks are maybe 18, 20 feet, I can't remember now how exactly high. But for some really strange, bizarre reason that I've never been able to resolve, I decided to drive my 18-foot truck into a 14-foot parking garage. And, it does not fit. Just a heads up. It doesn't. And the top of that thing smacked the top of the building and shook the entire building. And I was like, ah. So I backed the car up, truck up, and try not to run away. And the doctor comes out, and he's like, what just happened? I was like, dude, I don't know what happened. This makes no sense at all. And he's like, all right, well, if you'll just pay for it, we're good. And I was like, okay, sweet. Because it just broke some tiles, so I was like, it's not going to cost very much. And then he's followed by this woman that is all angry. And she's like, oh no, I already called the police. So the police come out, and the cops, and the doctor's like, look, we'll just cover it ourselves. And the police officer's like, no, we can't do that because I'm here and I have to report it. So he's forced to report it. So that immediately I drive back to work and I'm fired. So I was like, wow, right? But that firing allowed me to get unemployment, which then allowed me to go actually back to school full time. So it made me think of this quote by Elder Richards, talking about adversity. And what it made me think about is that I think most of our life we're trying to figure out whether we've caused this adversity or whether it's a trial that's going to make us a stronger person in the end. And I'm not saying, I would never say that the Lord made me drive my truck into that building. I would say He allowed me to drive that truck into that building all by my big boy self. But what He did with that really weird thing was that He took it, I feel like He took it and was like, how can I make this actually into something that we can use now in your life? And so that did. It gave me the unemployment, which allowed me to I took 22 to 25 units for 2 semesters, and it allowed me to get into a state school and start actually just making films. And so for me, it was a huge lesson that always, regardless of our circumstance, I think the Lord always looks to make the best out of our mistakes, the decisions that we make that we knew we shouldn't have. All right, so one of the semesters, my collaborator, Rodrigo Hedebeck, and I decided that we were going to make as many films as we could possibly make in a semester. So every dumb idea that came into our mind, we made a film about it. Every project we thought of, we did that project. It was always like, let's just do it. In the end, we had made 14 films. And then from that was this film, Ellen the Astronaut. And this was my senior, it was just after my senior year. And what was really important about Ellen the Astronaut was I was trying to figure out, I don't know why I picked filmmaking. I always say that I picked filmmaking because I knew I could get through undergrad, and then the expectation would I find some other job I could get after that, that would hire people with BAs. But making this film, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. We made this film, and I was praying a lot about what I was supposed to do. My wife had no interest in going to LA, which for some reason we didn't talk about before I declared a major in filmmaking. It was like I graduated and I was like, all right, we're going to move to LA. And she was like, yeah, no, we're not. Why did you think we were going to do that? I was like, I don't know. I just assumed. So Ellen the Astronaut ended up getting into some pretty big festivals. And for me, that was the first kind of experience that I had when I was trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. I was praying a lot about what I should be doing. Should I really be doing filmmaking? Was it smart? I had 3 kids. None of it made like sense, like practical sense from like, you know, common sense side. And this film getting in to festivals seemed like a huge answer to prayer. And so that gave me kind of the feeling that I should go to graduate school. So I applied for graduate school. And the interesting thing about graduate school in relationship to this film was I was trying to figure out where I should go. And I knew my wife didn't want to live in LA, and I knew I didn't want to pay for school, so I didn't want to go to NYU or USC. And I live in this weird middle area. Like, I feel like I'm not an artist enough for the art world, and I'm not a filmmaker enough for like the film Hollywood world. So I'm always in this kind of weird place. And I was praying a lot about where I should be going, and then for some reason, Davis, California, came into my mind. It was one of those check out Davis. I was like, really? So I did, and they end up having a video, their studio art program has a video section to it. And I find out also that they pay you to go there. And I was like, wow, these are both things I really want in my life. And so I challenged, it was the first time I felt like I challenged my prayer. Because the Lord was like, go there. I mean, it was like, I looked everywhere. And Davis, I don't even know how I thought of it outside of answer to prayer. So I challenged that answer to prayer, and I only applied there. And any of you guys know about grad school, you should never just apply one place. You apply a lot, and then you pick. But I only applied there. And I didn't have the GPA for the full scholarship either. And so I was the whole time like, hey, if this prayer doesn't get answered, what is the repercussions of that? What am I going to do? And it was like 7 months before I heard back. And I got in, and they ignored my low GPA, and they accepted me with a 4-ed scholarship. And in that process, which I didn't know for some reason, I found out that my collaborator I've been working with for the past 7 years, Dad teaches at Davis, and that's where he grew up. So it then also allowed that him and I could continue to work together, because he would just come home. It wasn't hard to be like, hey, I got this idea, and he'd be like, all right, and then he'd go stay at his parents' house, and then we'd be able to make films. So it allowed us to continue to have our collaboration. And so after, this is really going to be a thing. So I go to graduate school in the first year. I go back to the idea of just making everything I could possibly think of, and I do, with any way I can make it possible. And it's also, these 2 films are also the beginning of me understanding that that family is going to play a role in the work that I make. So I made God Bless Your Child with my son, who's 3.5 years old at the time. And I submitted around, and this film ends up getting into Sundance. And for me, what was really important about that was, again, just because the Lord was answering my prayers didn't mean I didn't stop freaking out about whether I was making the right decision. Because really all that was happening was just little tiny steps in the right direction. Nothing massive. I didn't have some vision that I was going to be like famous or teaching at BYU at some point in time. Just hold tight and eventually be here. So I'm going to show a little excerpt of it, just to give you an idea of this film.
Ready, Mr. Wabbit? Yeah, go ahead, Doc. I'm ready. Before you die, you can make one last wish.
Yeah? Well, let's see now. I wish,
All right, stop there. So this film is also the beginning of kind of thinking about, again, going back to this idea of incorporating gospel principles into the work. What I was interested in is the film itself is about this little boy who finds a rabbit, right? And then he has to decide whether or not he's going to shoot the rabbit or not. And it was the beginning of thinking about the idea of, can we put ethical questions that have gospel answers to them in the work, so that it's not necessarily overtly gospel related in the context of Mormon culture or necessarily the Savior in general, or being upfront about it, but dealing and talking about kind of things that are true. So it went to Sundance and it did really, really well, and again it helped answer the question of, am I doing the right thing? This is the constant question I'm asking. And so then I made this film, Waiting Room, and for some reason you get this idea that you get a film in Sundance and you're like, you've made it. Like, I thought I was going to be having meetings with like top executives in Hollywood, and I finally convinced my wife that we had made it and convinced her to move there. But no, it's just like, it's amazing, but it's just one other, again, step. The other thing I naively thought was, now every film I made was going to play at Sundance. That was the other great naive thing I had going. So I made this film, Waiting Room, with my dad. And it's a short, and we submitted it to Sundance. And at the time I was working as an adjunct, and I didn't want to pay for parking because it was like $75, and I was like, no way. And so I would parked a mile from school, and I'd walk in. And Sundance makes its announcements normally either a few days before Thanksgiving, on Thanksgiving, or just the day after Thanksgiving. If you hit December and you haven't heard from them, you're not in. So November is this like, for the last 6 years, it's not been fun at all, because you just are freaking out. And so I would walk to school, and there's a specific part of a bridge that I would get to, and I'd always be like, all right, is our film getting in? Are we getting in? And then the answer would be, yeah, you're in. I was like, seriously? We're gonna be like back to back, this is amazing. And then the next day I'm walking like, but were you serious? Like, it is in? I just want to check, because yesterday you said it was in, so is it? And you'd be like, no. And I'm like, but yesterday you said yeah. So then the next day, are we in? Yeah. This went on all the way until Thanksgiving, where I didn't get a phone call, and the days after until December 4th, when my buddy emailed me, told me we were in. And I'm like, having this huge, like, I don't understand why I'm getting answers that say yes and answers that say no. Is it me? Is it the Spirit? How do I discern whether it's the Spirit or me? This is really confusing and not that fair. And I'm wrestling with all these kind of emotions, all the while trying to be like, dude, do not lose your faith over a short film not getting into Sundance, okay? That'd be silly. And so then in 2013, I make these films that are Where did I put it? It's not coming up. Okay. Then I make these films. Is it playing it now? Okay. Then I make these films called Movies Made from Home. They're just, I was sick of the stress of whether a film was going to play at Sundance, and I just wanted to make films for the sake of making films. And so I shot all these little films on my phone using the little 8mm pretend app that puts speckles and dirt all over it. And I just submitted them because Mike's a friend of mine and we have similar work. He programs Sundance and we like raw type work, and I just submitted those. And they ended up picking 2. So 2013, I'm back at Sundance sharing these films I shot on my phone. And I'm sitting in the lobby waiting to go in to do the Q&A. And one of the programmers is standing by the door, waiting to let us in. And she was like, "Oh man, I really loved your film, Waiting Room." I was like, "Oh really? Thanks." And she's like, "Yeah, it was really hard. We put it in the program." And we were like, "Yeah, we're programming this." And then we put it in the front of a short block, and it would be so strong that it would, in content, that it would affect all the other ones. So then we pulled it out, and we can't program it. And then we'd be like, "Well, let's put it in front of a feature." And then we'd put it in front of a feature, and then it would affect the feature. And then we would put it in front of in the middle of a short block, and then it kept going in and out, and in and out, and in and out. You were in, you were out, and I was like, "Seriously?" The Lord was answering my prayer. It was in, it was out. So in the end, they ended up having to pull it, and that was a bummer. But for me, it was awesome, right? How often do you get where the Lord goes, "See?" Right? So for me, that was really, really awesome. In addition to making those shorts, I made my first feature, which is called 40 Years from Yesterday. And this is the short that I made. And then, talking to my dad, I began to be really interested. He started to talk about, he went to BYU, and he was a troublemaker and a scrapper. And both my parents are converts. My mom joined the church, and she's straight-laced, black and white, yes or no type of person. And my dad was this kind of rascal troublemaker, and he ended up being her home teacher and fell in love with her, and so he started to write all the things he needed to clean up. And so in the process of talking to him in the short, what I discovered is that my dad defined everything that was good about him by my mom. So he had this huge fear that if she died first, he then wouldn't be a good enough person. He would just go back to being this person he was over 40 years ago. And it really had a great impact on me because my dad is an amazing person, just in general. Even, if he wasn't an active member of the church, he would be just a great, kind human being. And it really surprised me that he defined kind of everything good about himself through my mom. So I wanted to make a film about that. So 40 Years from Yesterday, I cast my dad and my mom, and then I cast everybody in town that would play the roles in the event that my mother died. So she didn't really die, but she's going to pretend she died. And then I got the mortician to be the mortician. I got my sisters to be the siblings, and everyone that I could that would be players in that. I got the bishop to play the bishop. And so I made that film. And I want to show you just a scene from it. So I'll give you context. So in this scene, at some point, if your loved one dies, the bishop's going to come, right? Just to check on you and see if you're okay. So this is where we enter the scene, is that all the people have come, the morticians moved the body, everything's happened, some kids have come by, and the bishop is now coming to kind of check on him. And so this is the scene where him and the bishop talk.
one family home evening, Suzanne and I watched this video about this guy who's driving his family home from a fireside. And they get hit by a drunk driver. It slams him into a tree. And he's trapped in the driver's seat. And he can see that his daughter has died. And his son is bleeding. And he watches his wife take her last breath. And there's nothing he can do. And he cries out. And the Spirit comes and comforts him. And then tells him he needs to forgive the person who's done this. I found Suzanne. I was so scared. And so sad. And I cried out. And I expected that the Spirit would comfort me. For all I felt was alone. And then I was mad.
What are you mad about? And when you find yourself getting mad, what are you thinking about?
I don't really know. But I never wanted to be one of those people that, in a crisis, they'll lost their faith. And I'm mad because that's what I am.
No, Bruce, you're not like that. You're losing your faith. You lost Suzette, your partner. You're mad at that. And that's understandable. God understands that. Eventually, you're going to feel the Spirit about this. You will.
So, the reason why I showed this scene is we shot this scene seven times. And we reworked it, worked it, kept giving direction. But the thing that was really interesting to me was that every time we shot it, the Spirit testified that what my dad was saying was true. Every single time. And for me, it was just so mind-blowing because I'm like, this is just pretend. This is a movie. It's not real. But the principles of the gospel that my dad was sharing and what the bishop was talking about were true. And every single time the room got quiet, every single time the Spirit came into the room. And most of the people on the crew were not LDS. And I thought maybe it was just me, but even after we were done shooting it, they were like, what was that? What was in the room? And it taught me a really huge lesson that the Lord will continue to testify of things that are true, consistently, even in this scenario. And even though it wasn't, again, overtly gospel principle in the context of a talk or so forth. The principles of God's love existed in this piece. The Spirit testified of it, and for those in the room, they felt it. And when I would screen this film and travel with it, it was there also, which to me was really neat. Because even though that scene for people that are LDS seems like, oh, you talked about home teaching, you talked about the places that programmed this film didn't know I was LDS. They never thought like this is an LDS film. The cool thing about it was that I had some people that were LDS, some of them that were inactive, came up and talked to me about it after. They're like, I thought you were LDS. I caught some of your little hints. All right, this is the Movies Made from Home series. The last one I want to talk about before I end is God Bless the Child. So I've, for the last 7, 8 years, been making films, and the more I make them, the more I realize that my family is just going to play a role in my work. My dad's been in most of the work that I've made was really successful, which he thinks is really cool, even though he doesn't have actor aspirations. He just does it for me. My kids are the same, and even the project I'm currently working on, it's funny, getting this job at BYU, I was like, I just lost my whole crew. I have to fly him out here if I want him to be in my movies. And then I have a cousin here, and he just acted in the piece I'm currently working on. I was like, oh, and now I have a whole other slew of family members that will be in my movies. But God Bless the Child was interesting to me. Like I said, I always like to make work. I like to make lots of work. I'm always in the process of multiple projects. It's just the process of having tons of energy, right? And I knew I was supposed to make God Bless the Child. I had this really strong feeling that I should make it. When we made 40 Years From Yesterday, my dad told me the story about his mom who struggled with depression. And one day, she left a note that said she was leaving and she was never coming back. And when we were shooting 40 Years From Yesterday, my dad was 65 at the time. He never told me the story. So he spent the day stressing out. And at 5 o'clock, she came home. Like she didn't leave a note. And acted like nothing had happened and that she had never left that. And they never talked about it ever. And so it was really interesting to me to see the story that felt like it came out of nowhere, but had such a great impact on my dad that he would share it and that it still mattered to him now. And so I started to make God Bless the Child, and I tried to make it with myself. My collaborator was busy, and my wife, and then my 5 kids and 2 dogs. And it did not work. We were like just fighting the whole time. So I stopped production and waited a year, and then again, I thought, oh, it's just not gonna work. And during that year, I just knew I was supposed to make it. So my collaborator his time freed up, and I talked him into making it. And the little excerpt I want to show you, it's not part of the film, but it is the section that made me know that I should make the film. And I do think it's important in the process of when you're trying to, for me anyways, when I'm trying to do things by the Spirit, because making a film takes a lot of time and energy, and it's not just like you can do it on a weekend. This is like 4 months of shooting. And so I'll just show you an excerpt of the clip that allowed me to know that I should make it.
Who's stream content? Airing content.
I don't know why the audio just got weird.
What's your favorite movie? Do Mickey Mouse is over here? Who Mickey Mouse is over here? Mickey what? Who's stand contest? Daring contest? Knock knock. Hey Boo, stand contest. Hey Boo, if you do a stand contest, I'll give you $100. Deal. Now stand contest. You do it. Now you start. Mickey Mouse is over there. Up and up. You look away. You blinked. You looked away.
Your apples are strong.
All right. I don't know where the audio is going yet. So this excerpt is how I knew I was going to be able to make it. We were able to direct Ari and tell him what to do, and then we were able to get Boo to kind of react to that. And so I knew, like, having 5 kids, having 3 of them being under the age of 7, was going to be a real challenge. But this kind of little bit gave me kind of the understanding that it would be really difficult, but that I should make it. And it's done really, really well. And again, for me, this film is about the struggle of a family, right? It's about depression, which is very real, but less about depression. What I was interested in was in the children in particular. The impact of, I was more interested in the impact it had on my father than necessarily the impact on my grandmother. And what was really amazing about this film, as we were able to play and travel with it, was finding out how many people have a similar struggle. How many people struggle with parents that had depression, how many older siblings raised their younger siblings, and a lot of people pulled us aside and would talk to us and share these stories. Social workers would share stories of how this was a prominent problem that they were dealing with. And Harper's character, my oldest daughter who plays it, they were like, we pray for people, sisters like Harper, that they'll be able to help. And so for me, again, it goes back to this idea of gospel principles that are true, that the Spirit can testify of, that aren't necessarily, like the Singles Award or RM or things that are kind of overtly more what I consider Mormon culture than necessarily gospel principles. And what I have found and what my testimony in relationship to this is that what I'm finding is that the world is in a really great need of truth. I find, as I travel the festival circuit, people struggling with basic things like loneliness, and afraid that they're never going to find anybody. Not exactly sure what they should do with their lives, not sure exactly if they're doing the right things in their lives. Struggling with honesty or the way the world sees relationships now, which is getting more and more crazy. And if our medium has a massive ability to cause social change, It just does. Big social changes always happen through images, through art making, through video, and that it's a powerful medium that if, for me anyways, if I use it in a way to share principles of the gospel, to touch people's lives without them feeling like I'm kind of shoving it down their throat, but ways in which I can subtly share gospel truths, that's the way that I can have an impact. That's the way that I can incorporate the gospel in the work that I make, in addition to making the work that I like to make as well. So I guess I just want to share my testimony that I've had these experiences. And I've made a lot of other work. And I've made other work that I didn't feel the Lord cared whether I made or not. And some of it I made not even bothering to ask. I don't think all the work you make, you need to pray before you make the work. But I have just made that work for the sake of making it. And a lot of that work hasn't been successful, or as successful as I wanted it to be. I have found that when I take on these big projects that take a lot of work and take a lot of time and take a lot of money, that if I sit and I ponder and I spend time with Heavenly Father in understanding if I should take on the projects, and I do, it doesn't mean that they're still not really hard. I mean, 5 kids and 2 dogs is ridiculous. It's not a smart decision ever to do. Asking my dad to pretend that his wife died is kind of mean, a little bit, right? Because he had to find her like 15 times, I think we made him walk in that room. It was really difficult for him. It was difficult for everybody that made that project. But when I'm following what I know that Heavenly Father wants me to do and incorporating it into my work, the challenges are easier to overcome. Because I know that I'm headed in the right direction. When I was making for years, I was fighting with the cinematographer a lot. He's a great guy, but we just had huge disagreements. And I walked from where we were shooting back to where we were staying. And every night that I walked there, that Lead Kindly Light song would always begin to be a prominent song in my head. That just one step, if I could just get the things I needed to get done that day, then I would be okay. And what was interesting is there's a scene in the film later where my dad plays the piano, and I wrote a song for him to sing. And then he ended up putting that song as the interlude to the next verse. So for me, again, that was a really strong, I was thinking about it, you ended up writing the music. And again, felt like an answer to prayer. So I just want to close with my testimony. That I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know that Jesus is the Christ. I know that we have a Heavenly Father who loves us. And I know from my own personal experiences that no matter where we go, no matter how far we dig ourselves under a giant pile of rocks, pretending that we can never come back, the Lord's always just standing there waiting. And I share that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.